Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and my guest is no ordinary man today. He's a great guy. The reason he's here is we met on a virtual event courtesy of Steve Wright, and I'll have the episode that Steve and I recorded about leading the workplace with values. Very insightful. We took a look at how remote work changed the industry and how the younger generations care about morals and company missions more than the product itself. Very interesting stuff. But through that, I met Justin Workman. He's here with us. And I don't even remember what we were talking about. We talked about fish on pizza. We talked
Yeah,
about donuts, London. Somewhere along the way, faith got involved. I don't
yeah,
know how or why, but I remember Justin was talking about faith. I think he mentioned Paul and all this. And I said,
yeah,
well, I run a Christian show and I love my episodes where, in fact, the episode that came out yesterday in the recording world here was hearing God's voice and, giving more to Him. And I started that episode by saying, I love talking to other believers. There's as we call it, a synergy there.
yeah,
And I think it's so important as a believer to have conversations with other believers and to listen to other believers share their testimony and their journey. Just as alcoholics gather at AA to
right.
help support one another and vent to one another, so believers should meet up with one another, whether that's through podcasting or local church events. Hearing other people, especially during your struggles, can help. So we're here with Justin to talk about his journey of faith and where it goes from there. We'll let God, as people like to say, Jesus take the wheel on that one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's nice to be here. I appreciate you having me on. It's very cool, like you said, to be able to share faith journey, testimony, all of that. Very cool. I've actually had a lot of opportunity lately to kind of share testimony and some of that faith journey. So I don't know. It's interesting. Like you said, I don't know what God's got in store, but like I said, I'm getting a lot of opportunities to share lately, and it's been great.
He's making a
So.
podcaster out of you, sounds like.
Maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
2025, here we go.
I mean, it's possible. You never know. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe I'll become a podcaster so I can come to that gala.
yeah,
I
yeah. I
mean,
am hosting Podcasters Gala. Spoiler
if
alert for everyone.
if sorry about that.
No, no, no. You're totally fine. But I'm actually here for those of you listening, not watching. I'm sitting in the Jordan River, at least a depiction of it.
Yeah.
And for those of you listening, I'm not actually sitting in the river. That would be cool if I was live streaming from the Jordan River. But yeah, I just bring that up because we're talking about faith. And so, Justin, let's get into your story of faith. Were you always a religious or spiritual person, or when did your journey with God start?
So it's kind of complicated and messy. I went to church as a kid, with my grandparents primarily. My mom took me a few times. I just a little bit of background. Grew up with a single mom, so it was just me and her. I've never actually known my dad. Which actually, some people would say definitely has a part to play in my faith and struggles in my faith,
Right.
particularly. But it was just me and my mom. She took me a few times, mostly with my grandparents. I never got much out of it. I thought I did, I think, at different times. Of course, being a kid, things are different. But on reflection, I know I didn't get a whole lot out of it. I went with friends in high school. Once again, didn't get a whole lot out of it. It was all very rote, very mechanical. What I tell people now is there was no depth in it. Um, just I didn't, yeah, I don't try. I'm not trying to fault any of the churches or the clergy or any of that. Just I didn't have any depth. I didn't, once again, I don't want to fault anybody, but I didn't see depth either. I don't feel like
Mm.
there was any. I didn't experience anybody else experiencing depth. It was all very rote, all very mechanical, and I think people can fall into that very easily. So I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to down anybody that is in that space of just very rote, mechanically going through motions or anything like that, because it's very easy to do. And I mean, I can find myself there today if I'm not careful. But but not having ever had any depth, I kind of got in this space where I decided I was an atheist. I did some, research and just basically decided that there was just nothing out there for me. There was nothing for anybody, as far as that goes, and just rejected it out of hand and lived my life that way for a while. Well, me and my wife got into a really hard spot. She was, excuse me. She grew up in church. She went with her family, her mom and grandparents and, all of that. So she had a pretty rich faith tradition. She wasn't practicing. We weren't going to church. And our origin story is pretty messy and complicated again. Um, but when we got to this really rough patch in our marriage, like, brink of divorce kind of area, she said to me, "We're not going to get through this without God." And in that moment, my heart opened up and the light came on, and I said, "You're right," with tears in my eyes. And I can still remember exactly where we were physically in the world. I'll probably never forget it, hopefully. And she said, we're not going to get through this without God. And I said, "You're right." And um, like I said, my heart opened up. I started reading the Bible. We found a church to go to. We actually, on Mother's Day, went to church that year, that right after that with her mom. So on Mother's Day, we, attended where her mother was attending, and we stuck there for a while. Um, like I said, just got in full force. Like I said, reading the Bible, read a book. I read a really good book that changed a lot for me. It was called "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist." It's by Frank Turek and Norman Geisler. Very
Huh.
good book, very systematic, very intellectual approach to faith. Evidence based and things like that. And that book really helped a lot.
It's funny as you were sharing that, and you said that your wife said, "Hey, we're not going to get through this without God." I was like, I just heard a guy say this the other day on LinkedIn, and I realized that was you on Steve Wright's
It was
show
me. Yeah,
that
yeah,
came up in my LinkedIn feed. I was like,
yeah.
this guy's stealing another guy's story. I was like, oh wait, that was Justin.
It's my story. Yeah.
I forgot you were podcast guesting Guru now. You've been on a
Yeah,
couple
I've got
multiple
a long,
shows within a month.
yeah, I've
But
got a tour.
yeah, yeah, world tour because you
Yeah,
were in the UK. Now
that's
you're
right.
here in the Jordan River. But yeah,
Yes.
I think it's interesting when we were talking about the depth of things, how I'm translating that in my head, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing what I often tell as we are told religion, not taught religion by certain churches or parents. So you're told the stories or the tradition, but you don't get a lot of the why. You don't get a lot of the inner detail. It depends on the church, of course. But in
Yeah.
my personal experience with churches of the Catholic tradition, which I'm no longer Catholic, and then with my parents, it didn't really cultivate that yearning, that relationship with God.
Right.
It wasn't like, why are we praying? Why
Yeah.
are we talking to God? Why
Right.
do we do this? Or they would read, and in certain churches, the pastor will then, or the priest will explain some kind of lesson from the reading, but not always. So that's why I really like pastors online. I watch a lot of different ones, Joseph Prince and Skip from 30,000 Feet, and they'll break down the Bible. They'll go over it in Greek, in Hebrew. They'll go
Yeah.
over all the lessons from it. That's what I love, and
Yeah.
I think you realizing that the Bible was more than just a book, but as a kid, it was like the Bible was just a book,
Yeah.
and I think so. Is that kind of how you were feeling when you speak of death, or how exactly do you mean that?
Yeah. I think part of it is people would read and maybe pray, but I didn't see an adherence. Their faith wasn't in expression. It wasn't like the reading was in one ear and out the other effectively,
Mm.
because they would live a life that wasn't congruent with that.
You
You know,
saw
and
hypocrisy in
I
their.
I hate to call people that. I mean, it's so,
Right.
it's and I don't want to say that anybody does it intentionally, because I know people that feel like they have faith. They feel like they have a
Right.
depth, and they don't. I mean, like, or at least you don't see it from the outside. They'll say one thing
Yeah.
and then do another. Um, and so, like I said, I don't want to put that label on folks, but what in my experience, it didn't line up. And when I went to, like I said, I went to that church on Mother's Day, and I saw these pastors and I saw a congregation that when they read the Bible, it meant something in their life. There was a life application, like you say, lessons.
Right.
It wasn't like some loose lesson that I want to tell you, and I'm using scripture to justify this lesson. It was, there's a real lesson there, and it's going to settle in my life, and it's going to bear fruit in my life.
Yeah, I see. The thing is, because I've had this conversation with others who they did use the word hypocrite. They said they left the church because they would see their mom, their dad, and people, go to church, hallelujah, this and that, and then they would go party, go drink, go
Right.
commit sin of
Yeah.
all varying degrees.
Willfully. Yeah.
But, but the perspective I have now, which I always encourage, I encourage every person to have this is unfortunately, as difficult as it is, you have to disassociate the people with God,
Right.
because when you judge the religion based on the people, you're judging, humanity, not
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
so when you look at
That's so good.
Jesus, did he leave the church and then go, turn it up on a Saturday night, right? So you got to
Right.
look at what Jesus did. You got to look at what the people who we are called to be like and to follow are like
Right.
within the Bible,
Right.
and even the prophets, many of them were bad people, were messed up. Like we get that, and God is so amazing that he uses broken people and sinful people as his vessels. I think it really
Right.
demonstrates so much. I mean, yeah, I'm thinking of Jonah right now. I've got my book, God
Yeah.
versus the Indomitable Human Spirit, hopefully out already. If it is, check it out in the description below. But if it's not, it'll be coming out, and it breaks down in one section the book of Jonah. And like that's one of those things where as a kid, I remember Jonah was just, oh, he got, swallowed by a fish for 3 days and this is
Right.
that. As a grown man, I read the book of Jonah. I've read it maybe 10 times. It's only four chapters, short
Yeah. It's
chapters,
easy read. Yeah.
but there's so much in there. The point
Yeah.
isn't even about the fish. The point ultimately is about the ending. God, it leaves you with an unanswered question from God. What right do you have to be mad about my creation? And it's
Right.
like a very humbling, frustrating question. And I
Yeah.
absolutely love it. But you look at what he did with Nineveh and you say
Right.
that is mercy. But
Yeah.
the ultimate mercy was that God called Jonah, and Jonah wanted to act out on his human selfishness and stop God from being
He
merciful.
he
And then
did
God
act
was
out.
merciful to
Anyway,
him
to him, to both. Yeah. Right.
because Jonah he would have died in the ocean. He
Yeah.
would have died, and God saved him. Even though it's funny, Jonah admits it himself. He goes, God, I knew you would spare the
Knew you
city
would
if they
do it.
repented, and I
I knew
wanted
you
them
would do
all
it.
to die.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's one of the most that I break it down in my book about human emotion. I talk about how we've seen people kill over video game scores, over
Mm.
road rage, over the most petty things. It's
Yeah.
starting all the way back to Cain and Abel. We
Right.
talk about why was there a murder? It wasn't survival. It was human emotion. It was jealousy.
Yeah.
So my book breaks down that, and Jonah's a perfect example of that he wanted to kill, what was like 45,000 people. I don't know the number
Yeah.
off the top of my head,
Right.
but and God said, "You were mad I killed this one plant that covered you with shade. What about
Yeah.
these thousands of people who are intersected in thousands of lives, animals, plants,
Yeah.
their own?" But you look at children, we're not taught that. We're just taught Jonah went in a fish. Let's sing a
Yeah.
song about it. And it's like,
Right.
why was he
Right.
in a fish? God saved Jonah.
Right.
So that's
That's
like
the
one
depth.
example I remember.
Yes, that's the depth. And, again, there's a lot in the New Testament as well. Um, I like the one thing that you said, when people judge people, that's not God, right? It can be so easy. You think about all the pastors, all the like the big name
Hmm.
pastors that have fallen in the last year.
Televangelists,
Yeah. Well, and not even like, I mean, I, you
both
know,
in
I hate
person
to
and on TV.
I hate to throw shade at all and call names, but like Tony Evans, for example, and I don't know, sorry, I'm getting over a cough. Um, I don't know exactly what happened with him. He stepped down. He wasn't forced out. He stepped down of his own volition, and I don't know why exactly. But I think he was good, and I think he was doing good things. And for whatever reason, he felt the need to step away. And it's really easy for us to see somebody who's forced out, or like Ravi Zacharias, for example. That was terrible. You know, um,
Yeah,
it's really easy for us to see that as, like you said, almost a representation of God, but it's not. That's just a man. That's just a
yeah,
man that fell short, right?
yeah. And I won't name names, but there's a pastor who had private jets, at least one, maybe more, in a big mansion. And a lot of people have seen him on Instagram and whatever social media. And like you said, people could see that and say, "Oh, God only blesses, people who do His will and whatever." And I always use this analogy with I always pick Elon Musk and SpaceX because it's the first thing that comes to mind. Whatever, right? However you feel about him. If you met an employee from SpaceX and they were stupid, would you say, "Oh, Elon Musk must be stupid"? Whatever you think about him politically, the guy builds rockets,
Right.
right? He's a smart guy, right? Or if
Yeah.
you met, Jeff Bezos and your Amazon delivery driver was a jerk, would you be like, "Well,
Right.
that Bezos must be a jerk," right? It's
Yeah.
like
That's a
God.
great analogy.
Yeah, I always use that judging a company in the founder by its employees because
Wow.
we've all
Yeah.
worked at some point, most of us, with employees that we didn't like, but had a great boss. And I
Yeah.
would never say my boss was a bad boss because I hated my employees. Like
Right.
most of the time, my boss and I hated the same employees.
Yeah. Right.
So that's how I try to look at it. And like
That's
you
great.
said, the only person from the church, so to speak, that we should look at is Jesus Christ.
Right. Well, and
And
Paul said, and this goes back to your comment about the jet.
yeah,
Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Right.
amen,
Do
amen.
you see Paul living in opulence? Do you see Paul, being flashy? Do you see Paul like telling people to give him money? No, you don't. You see Paul on the mission all the time, trying to help
Yeah,
others, giving to others. Same with Jesus. He wasn't saying, he never asked for anything from anybody. He always said to
yeah,
give, right? I mean, in fact, he's there's red letters in the book of Acts, Acts 20, where Paul's quoting Jesus saying it's better to give than receive, right? So they didn't, neither one of them ask for anything. They gave and they gave and they gave. In fact, I mean, we
yeah,
know that the end of Jesus's earthly life was giving, right? He gave his life. He said, nobody takes
yeah,
it from me. I lay it down. I give it. And
amen.
so anything where you see someone saying, sow a little seed in my ministry, I
Yeah,
mean, we all have to have resources. If you're going to do any effective, you know, ministry, you're going to have resources. But if you're in the will of God, if you're about the business, if you're on the mission, those resources will come.
He will take care of you.
That's right.
They would sell two sparrows for $1 or
Yeah.
five for $2, if I'm getting those numbers right. And what did God say? Those
They're
sparrows
worth.
are worthless compared to
Yeah.
you.
Right.
So I do believe it, and I believe it was Jeremiah. No, Elijah. The crows would bring him food.
The Ravens. Yeah.
So yeah, and
Yeah.
I've always
That's right.
thought I always check my windows, but I guess all the Wendy's biggie bags in my house scare off the birds. But
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, I know. Even after his death, I just heard a sermon the other day, and the pastor was talking about what was the first thing Jesus did? It wasn't show up behind the Pharisee or Pontius Pilate and say, "I am who I say I am," and
Right.
ultimate reveal. Like it wasn't
Right.
revenge. The first thing he did was he found two people who were discussing in
Yeah.
distress what had happened,
Yeah.
and he hid himself from them.
Right.
He manipulated their eyes so they would not know it was he. And the first thing Jesus did when he came back, he had rose that morning. He
Yeah.
didn't go take a power nap. He didn't. He went and comforted two people and
Right.
gave to them wisdom.
Yeah.
As soon as he was back from the dead, that's what he did
Yeah.
was give.
Yeah.
He died giving, and he was born giving, living bit giving. So
Yeah. And then after Peter's gone fishing, Christ has died. Peter's gone fishing, has a terrible night of fishing. He's dejected. He's just lost his friend. He's lost his way. He's gone back to the living that
mm,
Jesus called him away from, right? In the fishing. And then Jesus is on the shore baking, cooking breakfast. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah,
give, like and that's the pattern, that's the example. And I'm not the best at it, I'll be honest. I've been trying to lead with generosity over this last, season, Christmas season, trying to, be focused more on generosity. But I mean, that's the pattern that Jesus set forth. Once again, Paul quotes Jesus in Acts 20 saying it's better to give than receive.
yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking about yeah, and Peter especially, thinking about I betrayed him,
Yeah. Well,
and
and furthermore, not only does he gets got breakfast ready for Peter and whoever's with him, but he puts him back on the mission. He said, "Do you love me?" And Peter said, "Of course I love you. We'll get back after it." You know, Three
amen.
times he asked him, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep." Like, get back to work. Stop going back to what to what you thought, to what to what was comfortable. Get back after what I've told you to do.
Yeah, and I want to get back to your marriage and those rough patches there because I
Yeah.
was thinking I've read the Bible end to end and I read through it. I kind of jump around and I get a quote sent to me every morning and every
Yeah.
night from two different apps
Yeah.
because he who doesn't know the word, so it's
Right.
important to know the word. And sometimes you just miss things, or they send you different translations. And I saw a
Yeah.
quote not too long ago, and I remember reading it, and it was one of those times where I just sat there for a minute, and I don't remember, where exactly it came from, but it said, "He who doesn't know God doesn't know love, because God is
Yeah.
love." And I was
Right.
like, right. So you look at divorces and relationships, and that's not to say that God-centered relationships don't struggle as well, but
Right.
there's more relationship issues than ever before,
Yeah.
and we see stats that are conflicting. I've had guests on my show who said that more people believe than ever before, and I've had guests who say less believe than ever before. So it's interesting how you measure that, because some people measure it, do you go to church? Some people measure it, do you have a relationship with God? Some people measure
Right.
it, do you know God? But we know that you need to do more than know him. You need to know more
Right.
than just his name and what's in the
The
Bible.
the devil knows, and the devil knows God,
Yeah.
right?
That's a
And
perfect example
trembles.
right there. The devil
Yeah.
has talked to God.
Right. But doesn't follow, doesn't walk in it,
Yeah.
right?
And well, I was gonna say, my one friend, he is terrified of the quote. He never wants to hear the words, you know, "Away from me, you evildoers! I never knew you, for you did
Right.
all these things in my name, but I never knew you." He's terrified to get up there and have those words spoken to him. And I
Yeah.
am too. I try my best. You never want to hear that.
Right.
And even going back to, when you had brought up Paul, I was thinking of, don't pray on the street corner for everyone to see. Don't make your
Right.
clothes dirty. They said, if you're fasting, act even more full.
Right.
If you're, living in shambles, get cleaned up so people don't know, oh, are you
Yeah.
living,
Right.
humbly? Are you fasting? Oh, are you praying? They said everything you do, do it for Christ and you know, in secret almost. So,
Right.
but going back to, yeah, God is love. So how did the faith save your marriage? You talked about your wife said we need God. God is love, and so
Yeah.
you had to make a choice. Either I let this marriage go, or I do some biblical exploration. So how did you integrate that into your marriage for success?
That's a great question. I would say, with a commitment to Christ, that's a commitment to love. That's a
Mm-hmm.
commitment to selflessness. That's a commitment to service, service through stuff. And so I would say that's it. That, commitment to Christ is going to flow out into other relationships, particularly, right? Your spouse relationship,
Right.
because that's the closest to you. So I'm committed to selflessness, committed to service, committed to, giving again, um, and and committed to um a vow, right? I mean, when you make that vow, and I don't know how people can do it nowadays. Like I said, we were on the brink of divorce, so we were ready to do it, or not quite ready, but we were getting close. But when you make that vow, when you get married, my daughter just got married last month, and they say, "We're here before God and these witnesses. Do you promise to, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for all of these things, do you promise to love and cherish and honor this person? How do you say I do, for forever?" I mean, I don't know if they say forever, but yeah, as long as you both shall live. How do you say I do and then say I don't?
Right.
Especially if once again, you have a commitment to Christ, a commitment to love, a commitment to serve. A commitment to love is a commitment to put myself lower than everybody else. I mean, in Romans it says, prefer your brother above yourself. Be kindly affectionate
Mhm.
one to another, preferring others above yourself. In Philippians, it says, I can't remember the exact verbiage, but it says something very similar. You know, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. Like think of others, serve others,
Yeah.
give once again to others. And if I'm committed to doing that in a Christian context and I'm doing that for my spouse, they can leave if they want, but if I'm loving
Right.
and I'm giving and I'm serving, they're probably not going anywhere. And if they're committed to doing the same, there's nothing. There's nothing that can break it.
Right. Whatever you do for the least of these brothers and sisters, truly I
You've
tell you,
done
you
it.
have done so for me.
Yeah, that's
Serve
right.
others as you would serve me. So
Yeah.
when you talk about being committed to Christ and committed to your wife as if she were Christ, and I completely agree. And how did being a father, you talk about your daughters getting married or you're marrying off your daughter. How has that affected your faith or vice versa? Has faith affected your fatherhood?
That's a good question as well. I probably haven't spent enough time thinking about that particular facet. I've thought a lot about the things that I've done wrong, like as I've come to faith
Mm,
and I've recognized my shortcomings before that. I've spent a lot of time dwelling on that. And hopefully it's informed some new behaviors. I can't swear that it has, but I've definitely thought a lot about, what I've done wrong. And what I tell people, especially people with younger kids, in my faith community, is you've got to ensure that they know that you love them, not just like I'm headed out the door, love you, bye. Not that. I'm talking about like they know that you love them, and that builds a trust with them that when you tell them no, or you tell them don't do this or do this, they know that it's for their good. I mean, it has so many biblical parallels. We as Christians should develop that same love and trust that I'm talking about. We should have a love for the Father and a trust in the good. Romans 8:28, all things work together for good for those that are called according to the Lord's, or, to love the Lord according to his purpose. I'm missing verbiage there, but you know what I'm saying. All
right.
things work out together for our good. If we believe that and we trust that, when we hear no, when we hear don't go there,
Mm,
don't kill people,
right.
don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, don't, the Ten Commandments, whatever. When we hear any of that, if we trust and love the source of that, then we're not going to get our panties in a wad when he says don't do that, right? Same with my kids. If I develop that love and trust with them, which I completely failed to do, um, I wouldn't say completely. I mean, we have a fine relationship. Like I said, I was with my daughter. I'm with me and my middle are getting really, really good. But there were some failures anyway. But if we develop that love and trust with our kids, then when we do have to correct them or set them straight,
Mhm.
then they're gonna know that it comes from a place of love, and they're gonna trust that correction.
Yeah, God said that, or so I should say that I've heard a bunch of great sermons on, you know, God and his timing, and one of those things being God knows what you can and can't handle, and
Yeah,
that if he had given a great example I heard was if he had given you that amount of money when you were in your 20s,
right.
he knows you would have been stupid with it.
Yeah,
He waited until you were 40 so you would maximize it because God knows our potential and when we can perform best, same with
right.
even relationships. God, why did that relationship end? Why did that? You know, and again, going back to my book, which references the book, the Bible, I break down Job and
Yeah,
God versus human intelligence, and it's there's a clear winner,
yeah. Of
and
course.
yeah, trying to wrap your mind around God's mind will drive you insane. Many have
Right.
tried to do it, but point being that when God speaks to Job about the intricacies of the universe, I
Yeah. Where
mean,
were you?
yeah, I mean, from
Yeah.
the edges of the darkness to
Yeah.
the Leviathan being
Right.
made a
Oh
pet,
yeah.
he's talking about sometimes simple stuff. He just talks about mountain goat droppings, for example, in some translations, about this and that. And then you look at humans, probably one of the most complex things biologically,
Yeah.
but especially psychologically, if I can use that
Yeah.
word correctly,
Yeah. Yeah.
because animals are, and I love them, I respect them. I'm not saying that they're dumb, but they're relatively simple minded in terms of complexity, just in their thinking. I mean,
Yeah.
and I've never read an animal's mind, so I don't want to insult them because, maybe they think higher thoughts than I. Maybe they know more than I. Um,
I doubt that.
but to thank you. Thank you. But point being, like, imagine God is. I mean, Job is overwhelmed by just all these animals in their minds. Imagine humans whose lives intersect. I mean, Justin and I have already talked to like 10 different people today,
Yeah.
all in different states, in different countries, with different lives about
Yeah.
different things. I mean, we were
Yeah.
talking this morning, you and I, Justin, in our group about online dating and connection and how people now have the world at their hands
Right.
from some parents, not knocking on parents, give their 2 year olds tablets and iPads and iPhones, which I
Yeah.
don't agree with at all. But
Right.
whether you do it or their friends do it, our youth has access to the world so soon. And talk about adding whole nother levels of intricacy and complexity. So, to have all that and to know that, God's timing is good and just, and that sometimes our lives would be completely broken if we got what we wanted.
Yeah.
And I totally lost what I was tying that
100%.
to.
No, you're
But
good.
oh, you were talking about parenting. Yeah, so
Yeah.
trusting that God knows what's best for us,
Yeah.
and that comes from one, we know his wisdom is great, but two, like you said, that love.
Yeah.
Whereas I agree with you. If you are a parent who instills fear
Hmm.
instead of discipline, if you're a parent who has a bad relationship with your child, they're not going to see that love. They're not going to trust that love. What they're going
Right.
to get is rebellious
Yes.
authority issues.
Yes.
Justin, you seem like you are familiar to some
Oh,
degree with the authority issues
I've
or
been on both
rebellion.
sides of that. Yes,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, can you talk a little bit about big question inbound? If you're a parent who has struggled with your children and you've been through that phase of rebelliousness, of instead of trusting you, they just think you're after them, they're defensive, or they don't believe you. How do you cultivate into a relationship of love and turn that around? Is that your kids just need to learn for themselves that you were right, or is there something you can do as a parent to try to bring that relationship over?
That's a great question. And I don't know if I'm qualified to answer it, but I will say, that's one of the things, like you said, let them grow, let them grow up. That is an option.
Yeah.
And my kids are all grown now. I mean, grown like 18. My youngest, my daughter that just got married is 18. So that's grown. Um,
Yeah.
but let them grow is one thing. And I struggle with that. I struggle, talking about the authoritarian and the discipline versus authoritarianism, right?
Yeah.
They're not the same thing. You might learn some discipline out of authoritarianism, but they're not the same thing. And having come from that, my mom was very authoritarian. It's going to be my way. It's going to be, it's very
Right.
authoritarian. Um, and so, like I said, I've been on both sides of that. But when my wife tell, and so in that, I want to control. She controlled me to a very fine degree. I want to control. And so when my daughter, wants to get married and whatever, I had a lot of feelings around that. I'll be honest.
Oh, okay.
I walked her down the aisle and it was a beautiful ceremony and it was
Right.
great.
You
But
didn't
I had a
charge an
lot.
I object,
Man, when we did, I'll just tell you, when we did rehearsal dinner the night before, we had a little rehearsal ceremony. And the preacher asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" I said, "Her mom." Like I'm not her mother and I. It's
Speak
just
now
her
or
mom.
forever
Yeah,
hold your
it's just her
peace.
mom. No. Um, but anyway, I came from that very authority, and so I wanted to control. I wanted to control my daughter. I want to control my middle son, who is very out of control. I mean, he's going to do what he's going to do, and that's
Right.
middle children. I don't know if you know this middle children dynamic, but he's very much middle child. And
Mm.
so wanting to control them is where it came from. I wanted to control them because I did love them, right? And so the methods were really flawed as that when they were younger, really flawed. It was out of love, but it was out of a harshness. I was very harsh, very control. I wanted to control them. And so one of the things, like you said, let them grow. That's what my wife's been preaching to me for the last year or so. They're gonna look, and she always tells me, look at where we were when we got together. Our coming together was not normal. I mean, I don't want to give away any of her story, but I'll just say it was very chaotic, very
Right.
non-standard.
Mm.
Um, we got, you know, pregnant before we got married, and that's about all I'm gonna say about it. But it was just very chaotic. Um, but she said, look at where we were, look at where we've come, you know, just relax, let them grow. They're gonna figure life out. Um, so that's one. I mean, that you asked, is it this or is it that? Well, it's an or, I think, or it's both. Um, that's one path, and that's going to work out if you again believe that God has got everything under control, and everything's going to work out for their good because that's His plan. Then you can try to relax into that.
Yeah.
um, but I think the other thing, like I said, is yes, develop that trust, develop, and it gets easier as they get older. If you didn't establish it early, 13 to 18 is going to be a challenge. 13 to, 20 plus may be a challenge. I don't know. Like I said, I've got 18, 19, and 23. So, um, 18 and 19, that's might still be a challenge. But as they get older, and I see this with both of them, they're more willing to listen, especially as I lean into, I'm telling you this because I love you. I'm not trying to hold you back. I'm not trying to hold you down. I love you. I want the best for you. Reinforce that. It's repetition, just like we learn anything else. It's repetition, repetition. I love you. You can see that I love you because I do X, Y, and Z because of that,
Right.
and I want the best for you, you should or should not do this. Um, and my wife has really tried to, pull me back, only give that when they ask.
Yeah. 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 For
Yeah.
sure.
And they get better at that too.
Well, and I think, well, that goes into communication as well. If your children feel comfortable seeking you for advice and
Yeah.
for, adult conversations, that's a whole parenting discussion on its own. But
Yeah.
what I want to say is you talk about sometimes children need to learn from their mistakes,
Yeah.
just themselves. And it can be difficult for a lot of parents, especially softer parents and mothers, especially
Yeah.
who want to baby their children, want
Yeah.
to always take care of them, and kind of helicopter mom them sometimes,
Yeah.
as we say the term. There's helicopter dads too, don't get me wrong. If people think that God is evil because they say, why does God allow evil in the world? And I had a whole video about that, but I'll tie into this discussion. If there were no consequences for our sins, we would keep sinning.
Right.
And biblically, there's historical evidence of what happens when you sin. But if you're
Right.
someone who hasn't read the Bible or you lose sight of that, then it has to be your own sins. Or sometimes other people's sins can affect you. I mean, that's how it
Yeah.
works. We are all interconnected. But does that make God happy? No. What does God say in Ezekiel? And I love this because people think God is evil sometimes, and he's not. This is what he says. I'm paraphrasing here. He says, do you think I'd take delight in the perishment of the wicked, or would I much rather see them convert to what is good and just and know love and enter my kingdom? I, what parent wants their kid to fail?
Right.
You don't want to see them fail. And as a parent, you don't even want to see the consequences of their sin if you could take that for them or take that away from them. So, in the same way that we as parents sometimes have to let our kids make their mistakes, whether they listen to us or not, then God does the same thing. There are
Right.
plenty of sins in my life that have, I said, God, you didn't even punish me because my sin punishes itself and me,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? So it really can be that way. Part of that too is you have to recognize it as consequence in sin. Some people who are wicked and delight in sin, who don't understand that it's wrong, will just shrug off the consequences or not care, or they won't associate it. So I
Hmm.
think it's important that you realize what is punishment, what is consequences, what are consequences, and then what is discipline. But just like we said, parents and kids, we much rather that, you know good and love than to perish,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know? And that goes back to, again, Jonah didn't want them to repent and be saved. He wanted to
Right.
kill all of them.
Right.
So it goes into humanity and the what do humans struggle with the most that God did not struggle with? Forgiveness and mercy.
Right.
Like I go over that in my book because I talk about how God has wrath.
Yeah.
I'm an Old Testament enthusiast. I know about
I
it.
can see that. Yeah.
I am an Old Testament guy. Yeah, I don't
I go to
really
the
read the New
new and you're like,
Testament.
every time you're like, you're going to the old, I'm like,
I always
okay.
reference the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
trust me, God had some. You touch the ark when you're not supposed to,
Yeah.
boom. You
Ozza.
burn
Yeah.
incense in the altar room when you're not supposed to,
Right.
leprosy.
Yeah.
And again, there are reasons for that, and I've had conversations with God. How could you kill him? He was just trying to fix the ark. Even
Right.
Cain and Abel. I've always been like, why was that not
Yeah.
acceptable? All right.
Yeah.
And big questions that we're
Yeah.
not going to get into.
Yeah.
Justin and I
Okay.
are not
Yeah.
qualified to answer
Right.
why vegetables were not acceptable. Maybe God's not vegan. But, what's interesting is that, yeah, God gets mad too, but you see so much mercy and forgiveness.
Right.
And the story I believe is Ezekiel 22 is the one I did the episode on, the most heartbreaking chapter in the Bible, and he tells the whole story of his mercies and love for the land and the people and how they betrayed him over and over again. He likens them to a woman that he found broken and alone and nothing. He buys
Yeah.
her jewelry and clothes and perfume, and he lifts her up, and then she goes and, pardon my French, whores around. She makes
Yeah.
idols. She betrays him,
Right.
and read. I mean, that was heart wrenching to me to read because it was an analogy for us.
Yeah.
And I see people
100%.
nowadays still doing the same thing, and we see it sometimes as parents, as mentors, as friends, when we have, there's the famous saying, what is it? They return my kindness with whatever. No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that being said, God displays such mercy and forgiveness that humans just don't have, and I think
Yeah.
it's because of the lack of foundation of biblical knowledge and emotion. And like I said, we've seen people kill each other over video game scores,
That's crazy.
over
Yeah.
not using your blinker, sometimes over parking. I keep going back to cars. That's what gets me mad. You can see I don't like
Yeah.
driving or parking. I'm trying to think of other stuff that doesn't, that gets other people mad. But sometimes it's the most simple things.
Yeah.
It could just be I don't like that guy's face. I don't like that guy's
Yeah.
nose. I wish someone would blow his head out with a shotgun. Like I've heard people make comments like that.
Yeah.
It's like I think people who wear those kinds of shoes should be killed, and they mean it sometimes. Sometimes these people like mean it, and we've seen, um, you see in the news sometimes when there's a murder, but you don't
Yeah.
see everyone. You know how many murders
Oh
there are
yeah.
every
There's.
day?
Oh
And
yeah.
I knew a guy who worked in the prison, and he would talk about why these people, quote, did what they did. And their reasons are just sometimes sick, sometimes
Yeah.
just delusional, and sometimes just you got that mad over that. I mean, think about, domestic violence. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
over you left the kitchen sink running. And there's a
Wow.
lot of factors that can tie into that, but even that breaking point. And then
Yeah.
you look at what we do to each other, and God's watching all of this,
Yeah.
thinking the same thing. Like, it's amazing. But Justin, I'll let you bounce some ideas off of that.
Oh, well, one of the things I was going to say is, I mean, you kind of started a direction. I don't know. Maybe you were going somewhere else and I don't know, but I actually at my church this past Sunday got to preach um, a small
Nice.
message for the Christmas program. Um, but I talked about the gift of salvation, in the context of Christmas. It's a gift, that mercy, that forgiveness that you're talking about. It's a gift. And if you don't receive it, it doesn't do you any
Right.
good.
And it's not
And
a
not
free
only
pass.
it's right, but it not only does it not do you any good, it doesn't do, if you think about, I want to give you a gift,
Hmm.
but if you don't take it, it doesn't do either one of us any good. If you don't take the gift of salvation, God's gonna, it's there, it's
Mm.
available, it's for you.
I
But
can't
if
use
you,
the gift. I'm the one giving it
right,
to you. Like
right,
yeah, like God doesn't need salvation.
right, right. That's what I'm saying. So like people that, like you said, that just they don't want to think about it. I mean, and in that book that I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest things that they said, the one of the biggest hurdles for people to coming to faith is not believing, which I find shocking because that was what, maybe it's two-pronged, but that was a big hurdle for me, is like just believing. But the biggest hurdle, they say, is a question of will, because once again, you're going to be constrained, you're going to be confined, you're going to be told, don't do that,
Mm.
don't. And so
Yeah.
people will talk themselves out of belief that, oh, that's not real because I don't want to experience that constraint, or I don't want to have to follow a bunch of rules. I'm just going to pretend like it doesn't exist. And so people deny themselves freedom and joy and peace and salvation, ultimately eternal life, because oh, I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to be told I can't kill, or whatever it is.
Right.
And so they
Sometimes
just
simple
reject it.
things.
Yeah. I don't want
Yeah,
to be
I get
told I
that.
can't sleep with whoever I want to sleep with. So I'm just going to reject. I don't want to be told that I can't, get drunk on Friday and Saturday,
But guess
or
what, Justin? Everything you're naming, because I'm doing another episode. I did an episode back in the day on a different podcast. I'm redoing it. Pascal's wager about, the gamble. And if you look at, let's say there is a, because humans only know so much, there is a percentage chance that there is an afterlife, even if you're not a believer, right? There's a chance there is, and there's a chance that it's forever.
yeah,
So, are you willing to risk that, which is
yeah,
infinite gain, for quote, getting drunk, having sex,
right,
whatever it is? Are those things worth the risk of eternal, life in
right,
hell or
yeah,
whatever it may be? If you're a non believer, there's actually all those different possible afterlives, whether it's Buddhist karma or,
right.
Anubis with Egyptian religion. I don't really know about those religions, but if you're a non believer, is getting extra turned up on a Saturday weekend, is, sleeping with a man's wife worth the risk, which we can't really even calculate? It's a 50-50, really, almost. Is
Right.
it worth a 50% chance of you get away with it? Or is it worth 50% chance of eternal, condemnation?
Well, and
And
not to
again,
mention,
that's just numbers. That's just a little. I have a whole episode coming out in great detail. I have a whole list of formulas and stuff for all you science and math people. But that's the most basic way I can phrase it. And it's like, is it worth it? Is the Bible asking you to give up anything that is so much needed in life? And the answer is
right,
no. I can tell you the
right.
answer. Justin can tell you the answer. It's not. It really isn't.
And not to mention, you're talking about the eternal consequences, not to mention the earthly consequences. Why do all of the rules and the constraints exist? For your benefit. Don't, you know, don't
That
sleep with another
dropped the
man's
mic right there.
wife.
Yeah.
I mean, almost, yeah. Don't sleep with another
Yeah.
man's wife, like you said. Like, that's not
Excessive
good for you.
drunkenness.
Like, I've been
What do
there. I've
people
done
do when
it.
they get excessively drunk? They either
You
become
sleep with an
addicts or get into drama or get injured.
fight. Yes. Yes. Vomit. I mean, right? Not good. Not pleasant things, right?
Yeah.
Um, like I said, if you just take the wife another, you sleep with another man's wife, it's not good for you. You're gonna feel some amount of even if you, which I don't know if you can. I've read another good book about how Christianity has influenced Western society, and we can't even fathom like a concept of the world that doesn't take biblical Christianity at its foundation. And people will argue that, but the book
Are you
makes a
trying
really
to
good case.
say, is it possible to feel zero remorse for committing
That's
something that society, regardless of religion, feels like is wrong?
right. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a fascinating book as well. Like I said, they make the case that Christianity is just so foundational to Western society that we can't even like talk without references to Christian
Yeah,
attitudes.
yeah.
Um,
Just the laws are based, a lot of them tie
100%.
back to that
Yes,
foundation.
100%. Yeah. And people don't even, like I said, people will argue against that. They're like, no, that's not real. Like it's 100% real. But so you sleep with another man's wife, you're going to feel guilt, whether that's, Christian guilt, whatever, but you're going to feel some amount of guilt. And if you don't, then you might really have a serious mental health problem. She's going to feel all kinds of guilt, you know. He's, if the other guy finds out, like it's going to be more than guilt. It's going to be rage and murder once again, like, I mean, it's not going to be good. It's not good for anybody.
Yeah.
If you sleep with someone that's not somebody else's wife, you run the risk of disease, you run the risk of like pregnancy
Yeah.
and, don't have kids out of wedlock, right?
It
Like
says
once
don't
again,
sleep with your daughter or your husband's or your father's wife. I mean,
right,
those are also great examples.
right. Bad things happen to good people when they do those things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, the rules, I heard a preacher one time say there's so much freedom in following those rules that people are just so opposed to.
It
And it's
sounds
like,
ironic, but it's the
it's
truth.
true.
It's
Yeah.
the truth. All of that being said, Justin, I think we've had a great conversation. I'd love for you to end us off with a Bible quote. If you could pick one Bible quote, I know there are so many great ones. I have a slew of Old Testament Bible quotes, occasionally the New Testament, but do you have one that has been like your go to throughout your faith journey or that is just speaking to you right now?
I'm gonna pull it up so I can read it accurately. It's in Philippians 4. Um, Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence, and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things.
Hmm. I think that ties in perfectly to what we just discussed.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, Justin, I want everyone to think about that a little bit. If you've read it before, maybe reread it. There's like I said in the very beginning of the episode, every time I read the Bible, I get something different from it.
yeah,
Um, Not conflictions, but just more
yeah.
wisdom as I get
Depth.
older and as I study more of the history of the Bible and the Bible itself and seeing it in the present day. It's just so mind blowing. God said the word is alive, and that
Yeah,
is the truth. It was a book made for all of time.
yeah,
And I think that's amazing. So, Justin, thank you for coming on and
yeah,
sharing some of it with us in a different
yeah,
way than we've heard before. I appreciate your time.
yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride. Jokes and laughter fill the air, on this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of a ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, a source of great pride.